They sat down to create a language because nations need languages. They sat down to create a language because nations need languages. They sat down to create a language because nations need languages.
Let me show you what Oxford, let's see what they say about this so-called modern Hebrew. For more than 1700 years thereafter, Hebrew was comatose, either a sleeping beauty or walking dead. It served as a liturgical and literary language, and occasionally also as a lingua franca for Jews of the diaspora, but not as a mother tongue. The formation of Israeli, notice what it says, the formation of Israeli, the name I use for so-called modern Hebrew. So you see this Oxford scholar calling the so-called modern Hebrew Israeli. It says was facilitated at the end of the 19th century by Eliezer ben Yehuda, I mentioned him earlier, school teachers and others to further the Zionist cause. So he's sharing that the language that you are hearing being called Hebrew, and they use this to influence what is supposedly be called biblical Hebrew, is all politics to further the Zionist cause. Earlier during the Haskalah, in other words, Enlightenment period of the 1770s through the 1880s, writers such as Mendele Mokhtar Safarim produced works in neologisms, which eventually contributed to Israeli. However, it was not until the beginning of the 20th century, notice what it says, it was not until the beginning of the 20th century that the language was first spoken. As a result of distinctive characters, such as the lack of a continuous chain of native speakers from Hebrew to Israeli, Israelis present the linguist with a unique laboratory experimenting in which to test a wider set of theoretical problems concerning language genesis and evolution. Indeed, the genetic classification of Israeli has preoccupied linguists from the beginning of the 20th century. The still prevalent traditional view suggests that Israeli is Semitic, in other words, Hebrew revived. Educators, scholars, and politicians have contributed to this assumption in their efforts to impose a nationalist narrative on linguistic reality. Revisionists counter that it is actually Indo-European Yiddish relexified, that is, Yiddish with Hebrew vocabulary. Come on, family. Am I not giving you sources? Israeli is a hybrid language, both Semitic and Indo-European. I argue that both Hebrew and Yiddish act equally as its primary contributors, accompanied by a plethora of other contributors such as Polish, Russian, German, Judeo-Spanish, in other words, Ladino, Arabic, English, and etc. These are all the contributions to what is being called modern Hebrew. Thus, the term Israeli is far more appropriate than Israeli Hebrew, let alone modern Hebrew or Hebrew to court. Yet closer scrutiny challenges this perception. The victorious Hebrew may, after all, be partly Yiddish at heart. In other words, the foundation of it, what you hear today, is Yiddish. In other words, Yiddish survives beneath Israeli phonetics, phonology, syntax, lexis, and even morphology. Although traditional and institutional linguists have been reluctant to admit it. They know this is not ancient Hebrew, not even close to it. But they don't want to admit it. That's what he's saying here. Although traditional and institutional linguists have been reluctant to admit it.
Listen, Genesis chapter 11 verse 10 explains the genealogy of Shem. Shem was a black man in Africa. If you repeat this back, Genesis 14 verse 13, Abraham steps on the scene. Being a descendant of Shem, which is a fact, means Abraham too was black. Abraham, born in the city of a black man, called Nimrod, grandson of Ham. Ham had 4 sons. One was named Canaan. Here, let me do some explaining. Abraham, Isaac was Jacob had 12 sons. For real, and these were the children of Israel, according to Genesis chapter 10. These were the children of Israel, according to Genesis chapter 10. These were the children of Israel, according to Genesis chapter 10.